Homage to the Blessed, the Noble and Perfectly Enlightened One, and to the Dhamma and to the Sangha. I pay respects to all our teachers. Sabba papa sa akaranang kusala supa sampada sajita parayo tapanang etang buddhana sasanang. To avoid all evil, to do that which is good, and to cultivate the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. So this evening I ask permission to speak on Dhamma from my fellow senior monks and all the other monks, and I extend my blessings and greetings to all you lay people who have gathered here out of faith with keen interest to study and practice the Dhamma. Today is an opportunity for us to come together and meet and get to know each other and have a mutual exchange of views and ideas in an occasion of what we call Dhamma Sakaja. This is the timely conversation or timely discussion of Dhamma. And what we're talking about, what we've come to learn about, is about Dhamma practice. That's doing our job in life, carrying out our role, doing the tasks we have at hand. And so a mutual exchange of ideas and sharing, supporting each other, this is beneficial. That all of us have come here today is for the purpose of growth in Dhamma. Because in the Buddhist teachings, this improving and developing oneself, this is the highest benefit. This leads to the highest benefit that we can derive from having taken this human birth. And the highest benefit that exists for us all is nothing other than bringing our views in line with Dhamma or in line with the laws of nature. We call this tittujukamma, making one's views straight or in line with nature. It gives rise to what we call sammaditthi, right view. We all have all kinds of views and opinions. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. And it's very easy to see for oneself whether one's views are wrong, because they very quickly lead one to confusion, agitation and suffering. So you can test it for yourself. So we have to learn to modify and adapt our views in order to take a different standpoint in life, a standpoint which is correct. And this leads to true understanding. We observe ourselves, we study ourselves in a way which leads to right understanding. And the initial starting point is to use the external conventional world, as our object of meditation. When we begin to meditate, we develop what's called kaya gata sati. That means mindfulness of the body, literally mindfulness gone to the body. And this is one way to develop wisdom and right view. Mindfulness of the body. The Buddha, who had perfected his right view, encouraged us to study this body, observe ourselves, and to bring ourselves to stillness of mind by sitting meditation. Establishing mindfulness and firmly establishing one's mind. We gather and restrain the mind in using our mindfulness. And so we're able to modify our views or to see things in a different way by contemplating the body. Each of us has a body, and it's one aspect of, or it's made up of, you could call it the truth, or it's made up of Dhamma or nature. It's the material world. The body is something you can measure. It's a fathom long and about a yard wide. And we can divide it up into its various elements. We can say that a person is composed of 6 elements. The first aspect is the material elements, that which is physical. We talk about the earth element, solidity, the water element, which is liquid or cohesion, fire, which is heat, and the wind element. Then there's 2 more elements, what we call space element and consciousness. So by observing ourselves as in the context of elements, we can learn to experience ourselves in a different way. You can experience solidity, water, wind and heat. For example, the heat element in the body. Heat is something in the world which heats up, which burns and keeps us warm. beyond the material elements, there's what we call space element and consciousness. This is harder to understand, but we can observe how it manifests. Consciousness, this is our cognizing faculty, or our faculty of knowing. This arises based on our what we call the six, our elements, our sense bases, sorry. That's to say, the eye is what we call the eye, and when we see, this gives rise to eye consciousness. We have an ear, and when we hear something, this is the arising of ear consciousness, etc. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. But this consciousness, this tends to delude us. It takes us into all kinds of intoxication or infatuation with things, and it tricks us. It's what we call the world, being tricked by the world. With regard to the body, the body can be an obstacle to us. We can get sick, for example, and obstacles, bodily obstacles or sicknesses, diseases, often arise through our digestive tract, through food, for example, or through germs which we breathe in. The mental obstacles, or the obstacles which arise in consciousness, arise through these six sense bases, through our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And this leads us away from freedom. So we have to learn to restrain ourselves using mindfulness and train in Dhamma. Dhamma simply means doing things or leading a life which is a benefit. We cultivate sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clear comprehension, and take great care over our lives and follow and observe our mind. The mind is something which has no physical form or external manifestation, but it has a very strong energy and a strength. The mind can be very dangerous, or it can be very beneficial. So, simply put, the way to practice Dhamma, is that we observe that any mental state, any thought which we consider to be worthy or beneficial, that we foster and develop and increase. Any mental state which is harmful, that we abandon. So the simple teaching of the Buddhists is to abandon evil and do good. But anything in life will always need mindfulness. And so why should we train in mindfulness of the body? Usually our ways of making decisions, or our ways of leading our life can be based on certain criteria. The Buddha explained that one way of making decisions is atta dipateya. This means decision making based on your own views. Then there's also loka dipateya, making decisions based on the opinions of the world. Most often we operate from a point of atta dipateya. This means taking yourself and your views and this as that which is most important. And it's based on a very strong sense of me and mine. But when you practice mindfulness of the body, you realize that you don't actually own your bodies. You don't have any rights over your bodies or over yourself. You just begin to experience yourself as simply arising in the world and taking advantage of the material world and using it, borrowing it for a certain period of time. But you can't say that there's any part of our experience which lasts forever or which is stable. And when you begin to see things like this, you no longer fall into prejudices or judgments around, particularly with regard to other people. You tend not to see yourself as better than other people, the same or worse than, i.e. judging and comparing yourself. If you think of yourself as better than others, and others are worse than you, then naturally this is what gives rise to disrespect. This is conceit. But if you begin to see yourself, your body, as just a body, not intrinsically a person or a being or an essence or a self, just natural elements, the nature of elements, arising and passing away. Arising, staying for a while and passing away. In Pali it's called upada, piti, and then bhanga. Arising, staying for a while and passing away. Then naturally this inclines us away from these thoughts, us and them. And then the opposite way of thinking arises. We just see that our body is just a body, just physical elements. And so the mind begins to become aloof from the body. It's what we call kaya viveka, or seclusion from the body. You move back from experiencing everything with a very strong ego or self-importance, and as a result you feel light. You feel light with regard to the body, with regard to yourself. You just experience your life as just nature doing its job, just the law of nature. And when you understand the law of nature, you understand that this is simply, it's just a function of nature. You begin to see everything in line with these laws. And so you can let go of all desire and attachment. So the Buddha taught us to develop those things which lead us away from desire, because anything that moves us away from desire moves us to peace. So kaya gata sati, mindfulness of the body, leads us to peace. All of us who have come here today have come with a mind which is inclining towards caution and care in our lives. We must be restraining and guarding our sense doors, our sense faculties, so that we experience a life of peace. When we're very cautious and guarded, and we're no longer leading lives which are heedless, this gives rise to what we call Buddha. Buddha literally means awakenness, or one who is awake, one who is holy. And this needs mindfulness. So with mindfulness of the body, we see that the body is just the body. This keeps us away from wrong views, and wrong views lead us to greed, hatred and delusion and suffering. So mental agitation, being hot and bothered, intoxication and infatuation, all kinds of suffering will reduce when we practice mindfulness of the body. The next phase, or based on that then, we can carry on to contemplate what we call the nama dhammas, the aspects of our life which are in the mental realm, or consciousness, vijnana. So moving from contemplating the body to the mind. Sati, mindfulness, means to stop and to look with awareness. In our lives we have the aspect which you could say is the coarser aspect and the refined aspect. The coarse aspect of our existence is our body. The more refined or subtle aspect is the nama dhamma, the aspect of mentality or the mind. What we experience when we look at the mind is that we can just divide it into two aspects, or two sides. We have an experience of what we call sukha vedana, pleasant feelings or happiness or pleasure, and dukkha vedana, painful feelings, unpleasant feelings or suffering, delight and aversion. And so we're constantly bound up with this delight and aversion arises based on the external world that we experience. Our moods and feelings arise. And so with mindfulness we begin to observe this process. We see that our feelings, happiness or sukha, we call delight. Suffering or dukkha, we're averse to. But the Buddha teaches us to see that delight and aversion, pleasure and pain, is not something which is ours. It's not us. It's just feelings arising or moods. And we can observe this process. As we get stronger or clearer in our observation, we begin to understand more about the arising of sukha, happiness, and dukkha, suffering. And so when we see our mind in line with reality, we just see that it's just delight and aversion arising and passing away. And this is just one aspect of nature. When you stand on the shores of the ocean and look at the sea, what do you see? How does it work? You see the waves and the tides and the rolling of the waves, just rolling towards the shore and breaking, and the oceans swirl from one side of the world to the other. So it's just a revolving process, arising and passing away. And sukha vedana, happy feelings, and dukkha vedana is just the same. It's just nature rolling around. We can also use a simile of a big stone or a rock, which if it's dropped, which simply just breaks up into different pieces, and the stone doesn't mind, there's no problem. for the stone. It's the same with us. We can just see all our feelings, our thoughts, our moods as just arising and passing away. It's not us, it's not ours, we don't own them. And when we think in this way, what we call the worldly Dhammas, things like pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and obscurity, these things don't overcome and overwhelm the mind. We don't get caught up in all of this. We don't fall into craving, which leads to suffering. When we begin to let go of this strong sense of self, we just see that all our moods, all our thoughts and feelings are just feelings. Like the waves, they do manifest physically. You can see a wave as a wave, but really it's just nature, something which arises and passes away. It's not something which has an essence. And when we see ourselves, our body and our minds in the same way, our dukkha, our suffering, will reduce, because we don't see our suffering as us. We don't see our happiness as us. And so we feel light with regard our moods. We don't hang on to them. We see simply the pure nature of the mind, or the bare nature of the mind, arises in what we call upekkha, which means equanimity. The mind easily becomes still and one-pointed, ekaggata, this unification of the mind. And this gives rise to the mind which is called in Pali the papassara citta, the radiant mind. But this is simply the mind which is peaceful, the mind which has gone beyond both wholesome and unwholesome. It's still. This is a mind which is free, a mind which is at ease. This feeling is cool. The body feels cool, the mind feels cool. And any experience we have by means of our 6 sense bases, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind, the response is always cool. The mind is letting go. For example, in our daily life we often see things or experience things which we find hard to bear. Like, say, seeing a child crying. Immediately this brings on a kind of a painful emotional response. But if we learn to see a child crying as simply the natural process, then we don't actually have to get agitated or upset on account of it. We see the feeling as just arising as feeling. Loka means the world, and usually we're attached to the outside world. But if we attach to the world and carry it around, then everything is heavy. We won't experience any freedom in our lives. But if we relate to the world differently, then anything that's happening in the world, for us, it's light. So this is called dittujjukamma, making our views straight, or bringing our views in line with the laws of nature, or Dhamma. And as a result, the mind is peaceful. We have a body, but we're aloof from the body, not attached to the body. We have a mind, but we're not attached to our minds. There's freedom there. And that leads to upadi viveka, which means freedom from all desire. That means whatever you have in life, it's enough. When you have enough, you don't need anything else. Just like when you've had enough food, you don't need any more food. It's not that food is good or bad, you just don't need it. And this is what we call the Arya Vangsa, the noble lineage. That means to see the danger in this continued round of becoming and desire. And as a result, our lives will be free from harm or free from danger. Danger arises in our lives when there's darkness. But when light arises, then darkness is dissipated. And in the same way, if we develop our lives with mindfulness and clear comprehension, then wisdom arises, and wisdom also is what brings light into our lives. The Buddha said, Natti panya sama apha, which means there's no light as bright as the light of wisdom. So take this away and think about it, and just contemplate that when the lights come on and darkness is dissipated, where did the darkness go? This is the same with right view. When right view arises, and you have this feeling of enough in your life, fullness or plenitude, you're no longer hungry. You don't need to add anything to your life. You don't have to struggle and fight for more and get more and more. And so suffering simply disappears when there's a feeling of fullness there. You're not burdened anymore. The Buddha said, para have pancha kanda. This means these 5 khandas are indeed a burden. That's the 5 khandas, what we call the 5 aggregates of experience, the body, feelings, thoughts, perceptions, and consciousness itself. Just these 5 khandas, just the mind and the body, is a burden enough to look after. First you have to feed the body, and then after a while you have to find somewhere to ease yourself. So the teachings of the Buddha teach us to go beyond sukha and beyond dukkha. This means becoming free from the danger of fire. The Buddha spoke of the fire of greed, the fire of hatred, and the fire of delusion. And so when the fire finally dies out, then we're left with coolness. The eyes and everything you see will feel cool. Your ears and what you hear feels cool. Nose, tongue, body and mind. Your experience of life is cool. And that's just very happy or very pleasurable. It's peaceful. The Buddha said, Nati santi parang sukham. There's no happiness as great as that of peace. And peace is found within us. If you experience suffering, just look into yourself and see the suffering as it really is. See for yourself, it's just suffering, and then allow it to disappear. The Buddha said suffering should be fully understood. And so this is how to live with mindfulness and clear comprehension for those of us who are determined to seek true freedom. And that's something which is very good, knowing what is truly supreme in life and trying to find it. So coming together like this is a good thing. Life is not short. We practice together and that's beneficial. But also you can practice alone. When you have wisdom, living alone, practicing alone is quite fine. The Buddha attained enlightenment in this world. He attained enlightenment right here, in the present moment, right now. So today I express my appreciation and my encouragement to all of you who have come together, gathering and sharing your Dhamma practice, supporting each other. All of us who have come here, we can say that we're friends and relatives in old age, sickness and death. We all share the same experience of nature, although, of course, in the world people see things differently. This is a great blessing for all of us. What we're all looking for is something which is of true value in our lives, but it takes effort. The Buddha said, Viriyena dukkhang macheti. We overcome suffering through effort and energy. But we all have the capacity to realize the highest truths in life. We all have to make efforts, and we have the ability to make the efforts to develop ourselves into truly mature, truly human beings. So on this occasion, I'll stop there. That's about enough for the time we have available.